Desmond Doss is wounded. He is carried by his fellow soldiers across a battlefield strewn with corpses of soldiers. Explosions thunder around them, people fall dead. When Desmond joined the service, he did not think about what he would have to go through. However, Desmond's father, Tom, warned him. He himself went through a war that changed him, made him an alcoholic, constantly depressed. Tom completely abandoned the upbringing of his sons, who were taken care of by his wife Bertha. When the children fought in the yard, he simply watched it. Then Desmond grabbed a brick and hit his brother on the head. Harold fell unconscious, and for a long time they did not revive him. Desmond was struck by the sight of his brother lying on the ground. For several minutes, Desmond did not know whether he was alive or dead. His gaze rested on a religious engraving, which depicted Cain and Abel at the moment of their brother's murder. For a long time, he could not take his eyes off the picture. That day, Desmond realized why murder is considered the gravest sin. Harold survived, but this incident left a mark on Desmond's entire life. When he grew up, he began to help in the church, pastor, and observe all the commandments and church rules. When World War I began, he did not go to the front for religious reasons. However, not far from the church, a car fell on the driver during repairs and damaged his artery. Desmond got his bearings on the spot, stopped the bleeding, and took the man to the hospital. The doctor told him that Desmond saved the man's life. Here he met Dorothy Shute and immediately fell in love with her. He invited her on a date to the cinema, where he began to ask questions about medicine, and Dorothy promised to bring him a book with answers. They were happy together. Desmond was sure that he would definitely marry Dorothy. When the war was in full swing, Harold volunteered for the front. His father was not happy about this. He still remembers what it was like to fight. However, the boy could not do otherwise. Desmond also volunteered. Despite his convictions, he cannot stand aside. He decided to go to the front as a medic and not take up arms. Dorothy is afraid for him. She asks him to propose to her and promises to marry him during her first leave. When they said goodbye, Dorothy gave Desmond a Bible with her photo inside. The Bible will be with him during the most difficult trials. In the barracks, Desmond meets the soldiers. He manages to find a common language with almost all of them. Only Smitty is unkind. He and Desmond begin something like a friendly competition, and Desmond gets ahead of Smitty. He passes all the army tests no worse than others, but until he comes, it's time to learn how to shoot. Desmond made a vow. He cannot take up arms. Even the stern Sergeant Howell can't make him change his mind. Sorry, Sergeant. I won't touch the gun. The sergeant takes him for a draft dodger and takes him to Captain Glover. Glover tries to explain to Desmond that war involves the use of weapons. He doesn't want to hear anything about pacifism or the duties of a medic, which Desmond was counting on. Rather than deal with a problematic recruit, he sends him to a shrink to have the guy written off and sent back to civilian life. Meanwhile, Sergeant Howell openly informs all of Desmond's fellow soldiers about his beliefs. Private Smitty is the first to provoke the guy. He does everything to make Desmond hit him, but he refuses. The psychoanalyst tried to make Desmond look crazy, but the guy manages to convince him otherwise. The doctor tells his superiors that he cannot write off Private Doss. And how am I supposed to maintain discipline with a specimen like that? I don't know. After that, Sergeant Howell takes up the matter. He intends to force Desmond out of the army. Because of his beliefs, he makes all the recruits suffer, and they throw a dark night for Doss. Smitty stops the beating. After the beating, the sergeant comes to Doss and asks him to leave in a good way, but Desmond refuses. He also does not give up those who beat him up. This act made the sergeant respect Private Doss. When the training is over, the soldiers are sent on leave. Desmond is not allowed to leave because he has not completed shooting courses. Because he refused to follow the orders of his commanders, he is court-martialed, although Doss was given a choice. Instead, he could pick up a rifle and shoot the required time. Desmond did not. Dorothy was waiting for him in the church. They were going to get married, but the groom did not show up. Then she went to get him and found Desmond in a cell. Tom learns about the court-martial from her. Dorothy tells him that Desmond will be dishonorably discharged from the army anyway, simply on principle. Tom puts on his uniform, goes to the unit's location and finds his old commander there, with whom he fought in his time. He takes a paper from him confirming that a soldier can serve and participate in battles without using firearms or other weapons if he performs the duties of a medic. During the court-martial, Desmond is asked to admit his guilt. Then he would have been simply kicked out of the army. But he refused, risking going to prison. The guy was saved by a letter that his father brought. After that, Tom left immediately. Before he was sent to the front, Desmond married Dorothy. During the war, his unit was immediately sent to hell. It was necessary to take the heights in Okinawa. However, the Japanese fought like animals. They were not afraid of death and were in no way inferior to American soldiers. Desmond and his fellow soldiers arrived to replace the killed and wounded soldiers who had occupied this height 6 times and were driven out of there 6 times by the Japanese. When they got to the top, everything was covered in smoke after the bombing. The ground was strewn with corpses, covered in blood. The recruits were afraid of every rustle, and it was not for nothing that the Japanese attacked suddenly and immediately killed several fighters. Desmond managed to survive. Not right away, but he got his bearings and began to pull the wounded from the battlefield. He also proved himself as a fighter. When a Japanese soldier attacked Smitty, Desmond knocked him down, saving his comrade. However, it was Smitty who had to kill the Japanese. Sergeant Howell and Captain Glover led the fighting. Their goal was to destroy the bunkers from which the Japanese were firing machine guns, and the recruits successfully accomplished the task. However, many people died on both sides. When the battle was over, the soldiers hid in trenches and craters from the explosions to sit out the night. Desmond found himself in the same pit as Smitty. They got to talking, and Desmond explained why he had vowed never to pick up a gun. When he was a teenager, his father got drunk and attacked Desmond's mother with a gun. Desmond couldn't take it anymore, took the gun from his father and almost shot him. Astonished by what he was capable of, Desmond vowed never to touch a gun again. The next morning, the Japanese burst out of the underground catacombs. They rushed to attack, sweeping away the American soldiers. The pressure was so strong that the Americans were forced to retreat. Captain Glover called in fire support, and only this allowed them to stay alive. Sergeant Howell, like many others, remained on the battlefield. He was wounded and could not move on his own. Smitty was killed in this battle. When all the soldiers and commanders went down, Desmond remained. He asked God what he wanted from him, and in response, God sent him cries for help. The wounded soldiers called for a medic, asking to be rescued, and Desmond returned to help. When everyone left, Captain Glover left 2 sentries at the scene of the battle, and they were quite surprised to see a wounded man being lowered from the heights on a rope. Then another one appeared, and another, and they took each one. While the fire support was being provided, the Japanese did not poke their noses into the battlefield. However, Captain Glover ordered a ceasefire, because there were still people up there. When the explosions died down, Desmond had to hide from the Japanese pouring out of the catacombs to finish off the wounded. But he was discovered and the guy had to hide in the catacombs himself. There he found a wounded Japanese and helped him. Night fell, and Desmond continued to save people. He returned to the battlefield again and again, bringing crippled soldiers from there. He prayed to God to allow him to save at least one more. Towards morning he found Sergeant Howell and pulled him out. However, the sergeant had to shoot back because the Japanese had discovered them. Meanwhile, in the camp, they were puzzled as to why the wounded were still coming in. A rumor had spread that one of the recruits had stayed upstairs and was saving people. He had even saved a couple of Japanese, and they were now being treated in a field hospital. When Captain Glover learned that Desmond Dawes was still carrying the wounded off the battlefield, he gathered his men and moved there. The soldiers helped Desmond, recaptured him from the Japanese when he was already descending. When he was patched up and given a rest, Captain Glover informed Private Dawes that they were going into battle again tomorrow. Tomorrow was Saturday, and that was a sacred day for Desmond. He did not want to force him to go to war. He simply said that the soldiers believed in him, and they felt safer when he was around. After praying for his comrades, Desmond joined the others and went upstairs. There was another bloody battle. The Japanese pretended to surrender, and it was a trick. They threw grenades at the Americans, and Desmond knocked 2 of them away. One exploded next to him, damaging his legs. He was lowered down wounded. The Japanese commanders, realizing that they were losing this battle, committed suicide according to ancient custom. Desmond Dawes survived. He carried 75 comrades off the battlefield. He became the first draft dodger to receive the Medal of Honor. Desmond and Dorothy were married for many years.